Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be doing a part two of the Liberty in a Cold Climate by Niall Ferguson. But before we do that, I want to play a video that came up about 12 hours ago by Mark Levin. It's titled, "Our Country is Being Destroyed." So I think that having these two videos next to each other, I think gives a little bit more insight in the direction of the country, probably the direction of democracy.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. Thank you for being here. You know, when I was growing up, it wasn't that long ago, but long enough, I really looked forward to television on Saturdays and Sundays, particularly in the evening. I was glued to the screen watching a firing line with the great Bill Buckley, or even PBS from time to time, particularly when they ran a series, Free to Choose, based on Milton Friedman's book. We were introduced to great men, Mises, Sol, Hayek, so many others, Ronald Reagan. I miss that today. I really do. TV has changed a lot. We have a conga line of guests, boom, 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 boom. And that's okay. But I try to do this program a little differently. Slow things down, think about it, dig a little more deeply, even go into some of the great philosophers and writers and so forth. And we have two of those great guests this evening. We have Victor Davis Hanson and Newt Gingrich. It'll be a smart show, not because of me, because of them. But I do want to dig deeply. When you look at what's happened to our justice system and the law, how it's being used against President Trump, how it's being distorted at every level, local, state, and federal, civil and criminal. And when you look at how the media are all supportive, when you look at how there are mobs and factions of citizens who think this is fantastic, and when you look at the Oval Office and Joe Biden, who's behind the scenes and actually out front now encouraging this sort of thing, trying to take Trump off ballots, trying to rush the appellate process, destroying due process and attorney-client privilege and all these other things. It smells to me like the French Revolution. Just have a phony trial and get him to the guillotine as fast as you can, because we have a country to destroy. We know what's best. We want one-party rule, and we're going to get there by hook or by crook. So I got to think of a book that was one of Ronald Reagan's favorite, certainly one of mine, by a man named Frederick Bastiat. It's called The Law. Frederick Bastiat was born in 1801 and he died in 1850, a very young man. He worked in the French legislature and he saw his country destroying itself, moving towards socialism, and he said, which means it will eventually move towards communism. Individual liberty, private property rights, the whole rule of law is being destroyed, he said, right in front of our eyes. That's exactly what's taking place in this country today, exactly. That horrendous State of the Union address, the constant coverage of these outrageous rogue prosecutors, all Democrats, these rogue Democrat judges appointed by Obama and Biden, one after another, some of them elected locally in our inner cities by Democrats, all aimed at taking out a man who disagrees with them. I want to read you a little bit of this, and then I want to encourage you to pursue it further on your own. It's called The Law. Bastiat says, unfortunately, law by no means confines itself to proper functions. And when it has exceeded its proper functions, it is not done so merely in some inconsequential and debatable matters. The law has gone further than this. It has acted in direct opposition to its own purpose. These are profound words. The law has been used to destroy its own objective. It has been applied to annihilating the justice that it was supposed to maintain, to limiting and destroying rights, which its real purpose was to respect. The law has placed the collective force at the disposal of the unscrupulous who wish, without risk, to exploit the person, liberty, and property of others. It has converted plunder into a right in order to protect plunder, and it has converted lawful defense into a crime in order to punish lawful defense. How has this perversion of the law been accomplished, and what has been the results? And he was looking at his country, the influence that Marx was having on his country and throughout Europe, He said, there's also a tendency that is common among people. When they can, they wish to live and prosper at the expense of others. This is no rash accusation, nor does it come from a gloomy and uncharitable spirit.
I think this is in the vein of what is transpiring with the ultra-liberal movement and some of the democratic policies that are coming from the state legislature pushing for reparations. In addition, you can see what Mark is quoting in real time with the lawfare that's going on in the current election cycle in the United States against, a Republican candidate.
The annals of history bear witness to the truth of it. The incessant wars, mass migrations, religious persecutions, universal slavery, dishonesty in commerce, and monopolies. This fatal desire has its origin in the very nature of man, in that primitive, universal, and insuppressible instinct that impels him to satisfy his desires with the least possible pain. Men naturally rebel against the injustice of which they are the victims. Thus, when plunder is organized, he doesn't just mean financial and economic plunder. He means when you plunder the liberty of somebody. Plunder in its fullest sense. Thus, when plunder is organized by law for the profit of those who make the law, all the plundered classes try somehow to enter by peaceful or revolutionary means into making the law. So his point is, it starts with a few, but then everyone wants a piece of the action. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. According to their degree of enlightenment, these plundered classes.
And this is the reason why through DEI and this kind of new cultural revolution that's going on campus, we are trying to have division in the country, sow the seeds of division between the perceived oppressor and the oppressed. And so when you try to demonize a certain class of people in the United States, this happens to be white males or even white females in some cases, then anything that's not white male will be an oppressed class and therefore should be getting some sort of social benefit. But that could not take place unless the division was sown in the schools. Convince people at a young age of certain things, so when they start to vote, that they are voting in these ultra-liberal policies. And, once these individuals start working and they start hiring responsibilities, they'll hire similar individuals. And then it creates a toxic environment in corporate America. And this is what I think we have been seeing the last probably 5 years, on top of if a particular group of people, let's say the BLM movement, doesn't like something, they burn down the town. And, because of this oppressor concept that the ultra-liberal has sown, they are given some sort of cultural pass to do the things that they're doing. So I think that we really need to step back and look at what's really happening, and it's actually the destruction of the rule of law. If you like what I have to say, or if you don't like what I have to say, but you want to watch, please make sure that you subscribe to my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. I am censored on YouTube in terms of what I can keep up. So I'll do a premiere, and sometimes I will take down a certain type of sensitive topic, such as the crisis that we went through. I've been seeing some posts where people are putting comments in certain types of videos, and they're saying that it's being deleted. I don't know what's happening with that. I wouldn't be surprised that YouTube is flagging something that you typed because they look for keywords. People need to start being more discerning on what you write. YouTube is not free. Now, if you think that there is something that should be said, don't write it on YouTube. Write it on the other channels, like Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. This is the whole point that I keep on telling people. YouTube is censored. And if you don't, if you think that it's so important, go to the other channels and write the comment. This is why I say subscribe to all 6 channels. So, so freedom of expression, as long as it's not belligerent and hateful, can be preserved. Because if you just put your comments in YouTube, then your freedom is fragile, and you need to be anti-fragile. So you have to have contingencies, and you have to have redundancies in how you communicate. So if you really think that something is that important to say on YouTube and it won't be censored, then keep it up on YouTube. But don't think that if it is a sensitive topic, that it's going to stay up on YouTube. The censorship is much less on Rumble. It's a little bit more freer platform at this moment in time. It will probably start becoming less free as it becomes more popular. But to think that you're going to be able to keep sensitive information up in the comment section on YouTube, you're kidding yourself. Now, if there's something that is sensitive that I think may cause a strike on a channel, I will delete it. But that's very rare. It's very rare when I do that.
Propose one of 2 entirely different purposes when they attempt to attain political power. Either they may wish to stop lawful plunder, or they may wish to share in it. Stop it or share in it. Woe to the nation when the latter purpose prevails among the mass victims of lawful plunder, when they, in turn, seize power to make the law. He's basically saying, now everybody's in on it, which destroys the law, justice, liberty, and the civil society.
What if is a symptom that torments individuals with OCD?
What if I upset someone I love?
Until that happens.
Also, for the ones that don't know, all the links are in the description of all my videos. So it's very easy to click the link and go to the different channels to subscribe. So make sure you do that. If you don't, you're not building redundancy in communication, and therefore you're going to miss out. There will be another crisis that will emerge in the near future. Now, very few people can communicate to you like I can. So I think it behooves you to make sure that you are subscribed, to make sure that you get my understanding and how you should be navigating through the crisis.
The few practice lawful plunder among the many. A common practice where the right to participate in the making of law is limited to a few persons. But then participation in making of the law becomes universal. This is why Thomas Jefferson said you can have tyranny in many forms, including, he said, tyranny of the legislature. If they don't comply with their oath and follow the Constitution and the limits placed on them, they're tyrannical. Just because you vote for them doesn't mean they're not. And then men seek to balance their conflicting interests by...
And I think this is exactly what is happening with Schumer and what was happening with Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker of the House. There's a tyrannical aspect to the Democratic Party. Now, people would say, oh, you're all against the Democratic Party. Well, I'm against liberal policy. I believe in less government is better government. and smart regulation when it's needed. But I also think that the Republican Party is captured, and they're doing policies that aren't really for the environment of the country, but more for the environment of a national security state. So I'm more aligned with less government is better government concepts. I'm more aligned with a Rand Paul, even though there's some things I disagree with, but I find that the Republican Party is more aligned to my current values than the Democratic Party. Both parties are failing, for sure. And both parties aren't really using the law to help the country. They're using their power in the law to help the lobbying group.
Universal plunder. That's what I'm describing. Instead of rooting out the injustices found in society, they make these injustices general. As soon as the plundered classes gain political power, they establish a system of reprisals against other classes. It's exactly what's going on against Trump and his supporters right now. They do not abolish legal plunder. This objective would demand more enlightenment than they possess. Instead, they emulate their evil predecessors by participating in this legal plunder, even though it is against their own interests. What he's saying there is, do you understand, in America, when you destroy your Constitution, when you destroy the Bill of Rights, when you destroy due process, the whole purpose of a trial, when you eliminate attorney-client privilege, when you target a single man in order to destroy him by hook or by crook with 91 felony charges, from the Ku Klux Klan Act to federal elections, to the Enron obstruction, to documents. Do you understand that you've destroyed the very foundation of the law and justice that is supposed to protect you? You think you perpetrators are going to be unaffected by this? That's what he's saying. It's impossible to introduce into society, he says, a greater change and a greater evil than this: the conversion of the law into an instrument of plunder. In the first place, it erases from everyone's conscience the distinction between justice and law. Again, think of what they're doing to Trump. No society can exist unless the laws are respected to a certain degree. The safest way to make laws respected is to make them respectable. When law and morality contradict each other, the citizen has the cruel alternative of either losing his moral sense or losing his respect for the law, which is what's happening in this country. The two evils are of equal consequence, and it would be difficult for a person to choose between them. The nature of law is to maintain justice. This is so much the case that in the minds of the people, law and justice are one of the same thing. There is in all of us a strong disposition to believe that anything lawful is also legitimate. This belief is so widespread that many persons have erroneously held that things are just because the law makes them so. Thus, in order to make plunder appear just, plunder again beyond property, the plundering of the law, the plundering of the justice system, that is, in order to make plunder appear justice and sacred to many consciences, it is only necessary for the law to decree and sanction it. And you hear it today. You're not above the law. Wait a minute. The law is an ass. The way you're using it, rewriting it, changing it. No, it's just because it's the law. And it's just because the government's using it. And it's just because the prosecutors are bringing it. And it's just because the judges are supporting it. It's just because we're going to have a trial. We're going to have a jury. He's saying, no, it's not. It's plunder. You're dressing it up as justice. If you suggest a doubt as to the morality of these institutions, it is boldly said that you are a dangerous innovator, a utopian, a theorist, a subversive. You would shatter the foundations upon which society rests. Hence, Trump is Hitler. Trump's going to be a dictator. Trump is going to put people in prison. It's Trump, Trump, Trump. This man was a genius. But he saw this going on in France. This is going on right now in the United States of America. Thus, he says, there exists a law which sanctions slavery or monopoly, oppression or robbery in any form whatever. It must not ever be mentioned. For how can it be mentioned without damaging the respect which it inspires now? Still further, morality and political economy must be taught from the point of view of this law, now this perverse, bastardized law, from the supposition that it must be a just law merely because it is a law. This is profoundly important to help explain what's taking place in this nation. People are being told that what's being done to Donald Trump is just. No, it's not. It's the criminalization of politics by the perversion of the law. Oh, no, you don't understand. We've heard it from leftists all over. We've heard it from people here who are liberal on different panels. And so he's been charged 91 times. You're telling me he's not going to be convicted of something? Bastiat answers this. This is immoral. This is perverse. This is the destruction of your lawful society. And of course, it's going to devour all of us, because no longer are the people who make the law just. No longer are the people who make the law and execute the law just. No longer are the consequences of the law just. This could apply to what would come later, the Soviet Union, to communist China, communist Cuba, to Islamist Iran, and on and on.
And you can see why the Democratic Party wants to rewrite parts of the Constitution, amend the Constitution to stack the Supreme Court. I've said a long time ago that the only way out of this turmoil isn't voting in new representatives, because they'll be captured and compromised eventually. But to actually go through a kinetic event to reboot the American experiment. Now, how that's done, I'm not sure. I do know this. Most of Americans will not participate in that kinetic event, nor sustain even the ones that are participating in that kinetic event. They're not willing to sustain it, and therefore we will lose our constitutional republic. There's an apathy, there's a passiveness, there's a self-centeredness that is taking place in the American society, where literally that Constitution, the actual edge of the document is just withering away slowly, and over time it'll just move inward into the document until all the letters, all the words, all the sentences are gone because of apathy, because of self-centeredness, because of being passive, not willing to fight for something that is bigger than oneself. If you would like to help support my work, please go to my website. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. I have on my homepage, at the very bottom of the homepage, you can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee. That helps support my news coverage. Most of the content that I do is for free. I also have people that help support the news coverage by being a Patreon subscriber. I have different tiers on my Patreon channel. So please, if you would like to help support, be a paid subscriber to Patreon. The first tier you will get, that's basically a donation. You're helping monthly my work. If you do tier 2, you'll get 2 lectures from each of my lecture modules in medicine. you'll get two videos, but you will not get the PDFs for the lecture. Tier 3 and Tier 4 for the Patreon member. Tier 3, you will get half of the lectures of a module, and Tier 4, you'll get all the lectures of the module. Again, nor Tier 2 or Tier 4 or 3 will get the PDFs. So this is a great way to, at a higher tier level, to to get a little bit more information that is not free to the public. So another way is to get full access to the module with the PDFs of all the lectures by purchasing the module on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. So there's many ways to support my work. And we have to keep in mind that there's tumultuous times happening. Now, some of it is contrived, and they just want to create more in the media, especially in the social media, create more strife and more anxiety. That's not what I'm trying to do. I think that we need to do deep dives in these topics because we're literally seeing a change in democracy around the world. And it is not for the better, it's for the worse. And it's because we don't have engaged citizens. And, we have a lot of citizens blaming the politicians. Well, to be honest, a lot of the blame is on the citizen because they weren't engaged.
The problem is it's applying to our country. Just step back and think about it. Are we really willing to accept a Democrat administration with Democrat prosecutors and Democrat judges imprisoning the former president of the United States, perhaps imprisoning him before the election? Is that what this has come to? This is the definition of the Democrat Party. Lawless, dictatorial. They want a one-party state. This is the undoing of the American system. Now you know why I used to like those older shows, and the hosts, and how they went about explaining things, and how they would talk about things like the law, like Frederick Bastiat. I'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity.
So I think that juxtaposition with what I'm going to be playing with Niall Ferguson, fits very well. Before we start playing the video with Ferguson Part 2, I'm going to just do a product plug. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. I have a lot of great products to help improve your health. We're going into the spring season in the United States, and there's going to be a lot of allergies that people, usually get during this time period because of the pollen. So the best way to neutralize pathogens and to soothe that throat and help to boost up that immune system is to take structural nanosilver, and I sell structural nanosilver in different types of products. The product that you should be thinking about getting for your household is the elderberry zinc lozenges. I sell them in a 21 count. Again, it soothes your throat, neutralizes pathogens. They're made with 60 ppm, parts per million. It'll soothe the throat, neutralize the pathogens, and help with the immune system. I also have it in Manuka honey, also in a 60 parts per million, 21 count. And I have drops. I have it in honey and lemon, and also in blueberry drops in 100 count. So please go to my store and get the drops and the lozenges to be prepared for that allergy season. It will help, and you're going to, be able to, get through that whole spring season. In addition, part of my protocol, daily protocol, is to take a teaspoon of Max 35 or Max 14. 35 is 35 parts per million. It's a liquid. It's made from structural nanosilver. You swish it in your mouth, you gargle it, and then you swallow it. All right, do that every day. If you're not feeling well, make sure you take a tablespoon or two if you're sick. So as a standard protocol, when you're well, just take a teaspoon of it a day, and you're neutralizing pathogens and you're boosting up your immune system. So with that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The link is in the description. Let's start playing part 2 of Niall Ferguson.
Premature to declare the inflation problem over, though economists itch to do that. But at any event, the significance of these fiscal and monetary data are political as much as they are economic. It is already clear, and this relates to my last question, it is already clear that the United States is spending more on interest payments than on national security at this point. And this makes it quite difficult for the United States to pursue the kind of foreign policy that the more hawkish American politicians would like it to pursue. Not that Ukraine is a particularly expensive outgoing compared with the entire American defense establishment. But I find this a very telling chart, that we are at a point when interest payments are overtaking the defense budget in the United States. And this must have, it often has in the past, it must have implications for how sustainable American power is abroad. My penultimate question. Could the Anglosphere democracies succumb to illiberalism or even autocracy too? Now, this illustration was used by New York Magazine for an article my old friend Andrew Sullivan published in 2016, warning that if Donald Trump were elected, then American democracy would be fatally endangered. And I'm sure there will be more and more articles in that vein as this year unfolds. It's very remarkable how worried Americans themselves are about the stability of their own democracy. 7 out of 10 Americans, according to a poll that was done last year by USA Today, agree with the statement that American democracy is imperiled. 74% of Democrats agree, and 75% of Republicans. So finally, consensus. Except that the Democrats think that democracy is endangered by Republicans, and the Republicans think that democracy is endangered by Democrats. That is not quite consensus. And there are all kinds of arguments that can be made about this. There'll be an argument, no doubt, this year, as there was in 2020, about voting rights. Democrats will say that Republicans are trying to restrict them, and Republicans will say that Democrats are making them too lax. And Elon Musk will agree with the Republicans. In fact, if you follow Elon Musk, and he has to be mentioned in all lectures, as does Taylor Swift. Now I've done that, we can move on. Musk tweeted just the other day, many states automatically register anyone with a driver's license to vote, no citizenship verification, etc. So these debates are going to undoubtedly continue and presumably reach a crescendo on November the 5th. I think Americans are right to believe that their democracy is imperiled. And I'll tell you why. No republic can really have an open border, can't really allow the definition of the citizen to be eroded so much that non-citizens get to vote in elections, as clearly happens in some states. When your illegal immigrants exceed your natural increase through reproduction, you have a problem. These are startling charts. it's a fundamental breakdown in the rule of law. If the very criteria for citizenship are themselves unclear, and people can acquire voting rights that they ought not to have quite readily. Now, I mentioned earlier how hard it was to measure the rule of law. The most sophisticated attempt to do this, to quantify, if one can, the quality of rule of law is the World Justice Project. And I like the World Justice Project. I probably shouldn't, but I do, because of its precision. It's so precise that you can't possibly read all the different measures of the quality of rule of law. But I thought you'd be at least satisfied by the fact that there were so many. And what is marvelous about the World Justice Project is that they annually score the quality of legal institutions in multiple countries. And what is interesting is that if one compares the 2023 performance of the United States with the 2015 performance, the quality of the rule of law has measurably declined in a majority of different domains. I defer to Professor George and others much more learned than me in the law as to how useful this exercise is. But it has, I think, the ring of truth in it. I wrote in a book called The Great Degeneration that the United States was suffering a deterioration in the rule of law. I wrote this 12 years ago, in that the rule of law was evolving or degenerating into the rule of lawyers, which I argued was something distinctly different. And I think there is, I think there is good reason to believe this. And that is very important for my argument. Because remember Adam Ferguson's point. Democracy without the rule of law is barely worth having and unlikely to be sustainable. But if the rule of law itself becomes corrupted, then woe betide you. I'm not done. The Financial Times, perhaps it's prejudiced being a British newspaper, nevertheless published some very interesting data on two specific issues that differentiate the United States from the United Kingdom. As a dual citizen, as a US citizen as well as a British citizen, I am neutral in this debate, but I merely present the data to you. First, the partisan divide in trust in media is far wider in the US than in the UK. The levels of distrust or partisan difference on media outlets in the US is far, far wider than in the UK. And you can see here that there's very little difference in attitudes and trust between Conservative and Labour voters, whereas between Republicans and Democrats, there's an enormous gap. And this is really interesting. There is far more racial and ethnic segregation in American cities than in British cities. And that is, I think, something that most Americans don't recognize. But it's quite striking to me as I travel back and forth between Britain and America. In all kinds of ways, England is a much more racially integrated society than this country. All lectures have to mention Elon Musk, Taylor Swift, and Claudine Gay. And I could not leave her out. What's fascinating about the gap revealed to many people for the first time by the events that followed October the 7th last year, the gap between our academic elites and everybody else, is that it really is there in polling data. This poll done by Rasmussen asks ordinary American voters and Ivy Leaguers, and I'm talking about you all, the Ivy Leaguers, and defined as people who've been to elite universities and have 2 degrees and live in what Charles Murray calls the super zips. And so they ask the Ivy Leaguers and the voters a set of questions, and the gaps are just staggering. Personal finances getting better. Hardly any ordinary voters say yes. Almost every Ivy Leaguer says they are. Does the US provide too much individual freedom? Yes, say half the Ivy Leaguers. And so it goes on. Would you favor rationing of gas, meat, and electricity to fight climate change? Almost all the Ivy Leaguers say, yes, let's impose rationing. And ordinary Americans are like, are you mad? Would you personally pay $500 more in taxes and higher costs to fight climate change? Of course we would, say the Ivy Leaguers. We're rolling in money, easy. And ordinary Americans are like, forget about it. And so it goes on. Favorable views of members of Congress. Ordinary Americans despise members of Congress and Ivy Leaguers.
I think the term that we should be focusing on here, and I don't think Niall Ferguson says it, but it's about sensitivity of policy. How sensitive one would be. In biology, sensitivity can be measured in how many, let's say, receptors one may have on a particular cell. The more receptors for a particular chemical, the more sensitive you are to that chemical. The reason being is that there's more probability that chemical will dock to that receptor. If you have less receptors, then you have less sensitivity. That's a biological way of explaining some sort of social behavior. So if someone is rich, right, or well-to-do, or is in a position in terms of location or their particular career, where they aren't as sensitive to these policy changes, to, let's say, fight climate change, or increase some sort of consumption tax. If you're in a situation where you're not sensitive to that change in policy, you're most likely going to be more for it. It's the ones that are going to be sensitive to the policy that changes their well-being in life, where they're going to be more in an uproar. And this is a problem that I keep on saying about the egoism in America that is started to take hold. It's about where their particular position is on how it may affect them, and not necessarily what's the best for the country. And so there needs to be a better analysis on policies that put aside the actual sensitivity function and is more, focused on the betterment of the country. Will it make the country stronger in the short run and in the long run? Will it make the country weaker in the long run, better in the short run, weaker in the short run and the long run? So you have to work out this matrix of each of the policies. But unfortunately, human behavior kicks in, and it's all about sensitivity to policy. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the products that will help with your lipid profile. I have omega-3 on my store, so please go to the store and purchase the omega-3. And why do you want omega-3 and take it every day? It'll bring down the LDL. Now, what is important here is to control your lipid profile, reduce cardiovascular disease, watch what you're eating, try to bring down those triglycerides and your cholesterol, do balancing exercises, walk. Heart health is really important. And a big part of heart health is controlling the lipid profile and doing mild exercises. Don't get too crazy, right? Especially in the post-crisis era, because of other inflammatory problems with the cardiovascular system. But there are ways to maintain health by doing mild exercising. Walking is a really important exercise that many people are not doing adequately enough. If you live in a city and you do a lot of walking, it's just part of your being. And so it's just natural. But in the suburbs where people get in their car and they're driving to, to their place of employment, or they're, driving to the grocery store, or driving to, wherever their destination is, instead of walking, you don't walk as much. You'll notice that you won't walk as much. So it's not just mild exercise, through walking, but it's also watching what you eat. Stay away from the fatty foods. Stay away from the processed foods. So, it's a holistic approach to, for improving cardiovascular health. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the omega-3. That will help to improve your lipid profile. Take it every day. To help to boost your immune system, take magnesium and zinc every day. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose of it. All right. So go to the store, get the magnesium and zinc, and improve your immune system. And lastly, I sell products that have dual purpose. So I have a structural nano silver gel that will neutralize pathogens. You apply it on your hands, you apply it around your mouth, your nose, your ears, your eyes. It stays active for about 5 hours to help neutralize pathogens. So if you're getting sick, or you're in an environment where you are sick, or you're in an environment where many people are sick, the prevalency of being sick is up, use this product. All right. And it'll reduce your chances of getting sick, and to help you getting better. Now, it has a dual purpose. You can use it as a skincare. Let's say you have a cut, you can apply the structural nano silver gel on the cut, and it'll help to heal the cut. The reason why it helps to heal it is because it is neutralizing pathogens and keeping the wound clean. Same thing with abrasions and minor burns. In addition, you can apply this on your skin at night and then exfoliate it in the morning. And you do that every day, you'll notice that your skin is clearing and your skin is tightening. It's part of it's one component of a more complex skincare box that I have, where you can, also add in collagen and C60, resveratrol, and vitamin C, and drink 64 ounces of filtered water, and it'll be improving the dermal layer. So the gel is improving the topical part, surface of your skin. The other items that I just mentioned will help with improving the dermal layer. So please go to the store and get the structural nano silver gel. Let's continue with Niall Ferguson.
This is what Charles Murray was talking about in his book Coming Apart, which was enormously prescient in anticipating the great divergence, the emergence of two Americas. Belmont, his caricature Ivy League zip code, and Fishtown everywhere else, middle America. Why else should we be worried about American democracy? Well, I think the mental health epidemics are a source of meaningful concern. Jonathan Haidt has just published a new book on this subject, identifying these as the principal cause of the deterioration of young Americans' mental health. The data here on high school girls are just one of the many exhibits I could offer you. This huge increase in the space of just 10 years in feelings of sadness and helplessness, serious contemplation of suicide. But don't get the idea that it's only young people who are in the grip of an epidemic of mental ill health, because all Americans are. Angus Deaton's work on deaths of despair, which I remember being stunned by when I first came across it, shows this staggering increase in suicide and overdose deaths And this is particularly true of middle-aged, middle Americans, not of young Americans. Why, under these circumstances, is anyone surprised that Donald Trump is making a comeback? You would have to have spent your life entirely on the Princeton campus to be surprised. And, you know, when you just look at how the Trump administration did for the ordinary Americans, this is real median household income growth in presidential terms, it is very striking indeed that Donald Trump's administration had one of the largest percentage improvements in real median household income of any president since Ronald Reagan.
And if people want to remember why that was, it was these reduction in taxes during his administration. This is all pre-COVID type stuff. And not only that, I think that there was just a hope. I think many people that voted for Trump and the Republican Party at that time was seeing that perhaps this is a rebirth of less regulation, less taxation, more business opportunities for people. And the economy was really doing well. We had a good energy policy in terms of keeping energy costs down for the consumer. And that was all reversed, with the Democratic Party coming into office and changing that whole supply demand dynamic in energy, and energy costs went up. So, and then the regulation, the Republican Party was reducing regulations, not increasing regulations. And businesses are too overly regulated, and that doesn't bode well for a vibrant economy and entrepreneurship. So I just think that just before COVID, we had a vibrant economy, and then the crisis happens, and people were laid off and sheltered in place, and a lot of problems started to arise. To perturb the economy, and there was deficit spending, caused a lot of problems, and it was exacerbated when the Democratic Party came into office. So I think that was part of the reason why there was this kind of new hope. It was kind of like almost a Reagan-esque new hope to get out of the negativity of the 70s, especially from Carter's administration, in terms of, a transition with Reagan. I think a lot of people saw some hope with Trump that was similar to Reagan.
And that is the real simple and, I think, persuasive explanation for his return. Up until this point, the Biden administration, mainly because of its inflationary error in its first year in office, is performing as badly as the first administration of Barack Obama. I'm nearly done. For those of you who are concerned at the prospect of a second Trump term, let me offer reassurance. The polling is very striking. When asked how they would vote, Americans in the swing states say they would vote for Trump. When asked how they would vote if Trump had a criminal conviction, it swings against Trump. The song is, "I fought the law and the law won," not "I fought the law and I won." And this is the crux of my talk tonight. The rule of law is still a real thing. Did you notice that when ordinary Americans are asked their opinion of lawyers, It's much more positive than their opinion of journalists or members of Congress. To a striking extent, Americans still believe in the rule of law. And that's why they change their mind about Trump if Trump is convicted. This is a straw you may wish to cling to in the country.
Well, I think this is the reason why the centrist, undecided voter is going to be key. The one that is very pro-Republican or pro-Trump is still going to vote. The ones that are pro-Democrat or pro-Biden or ultra-liberal, they're going to vote Democrat. Now it's that centrist, because the country is divided almost 50-50 in voters and also in electoral votes. That centrist group, that undecided, is going to decide the election. Now, if the core of that group has different perspective on Trump, if he is convicted with some of these lawfare cases, then, you know, and they have a negative outlook on him, then the Republican Party will lose the general election for the presidency. But my gut feeling here is that there is an awful lot of centrists or undecided voters that actually are seeing through the lawfare. And even if he's convicted, I think there's going to be more of them that are going to be emboldened to actually vote for the Republican Party because they feel is that the rule of law has not been upheld.
Weeks and months. I want to give the last word to the other superior Ferguson. And I'm going to conclude with 3 quotations from that same essay on civil society, which I hope will immediately strike you as appropriate conclusions to what I've said this afternoon. First, from section 3 of Relaxations in the National Spirit Incident to Polished Nations. And you are now a polished nation. If to any people it be the avowed object of policy in all its internal refinements, to secure only the person and the property of the subject without any regard to his political character, the Constitution indeed may be free, but its members may likewise become unworthy of the freedom they possess and unfit to preserve it. If men no longer act in the enjoyment of liberty from liberal sentiments, or with a view to the preservation of public manners, if individuals think themselves secure without any attention or effort of their own, this boasted advantage may be found only to give them an opportunity of enjoying at leisure the conveniences and necessaries of life, or, in the language of Cato, teach them to value their houses, their villas, their statues, and their pictures at a higher rate than they do the Republic. They may be found to grow tired in secret of a free constitution, of which they never cease to boast in their conversation, and which they always neglect in their conduct. God, he was good. The dangers to liberty can never be greater from any cause than they are from the supposed remissness of the people. I love that word, remissness, to whose personal vigor every constitution, as it owed its establishment, so must continue to owe its preservation, and it gets better. Section 5 of national waste. States have endeavored in some instances by pawning their credit instead of employing their capital to disguise the hazards they ran. They have found in the loans they raised a casual resource which encouraged their enterprises. They have seemed by their manner of erecting transferable funds to leave the capital for purposes of trade in the hands of the subject, while it is actually expended by the government. They have by these means left future ages to answer in part for debts contracted with a view to future emolument. The growing burden, too, is thus gradually laid. And if a nation be to sink in some future age, every minister hopes it may still keep afloat in his own. But the measure for this very reason is, with all its advantages, extremely dangerous in the hands of a precipitant and ambitious administration regarding only the present occasion and imagining a state to be inexhaustible, while a capital can be borrowed and the interest be paid, an expense if it bring no proper return is to be reckoned among the causes of national ruin. I don't know why that's not a meme. Because people love making up quotes about debt and attributing them to Enlightenment philosophers. There are lots of fake quotes out there. This is the real thing. Finally, and I think crucially, Section 6 of the Progress and Termination of Despotism. Where men are remiss or corrupted, the virtue of their leaders, of the good intention of their magistrates, will not always secure them in the possession of political freedom. Implicit submission to any leader or the uncontrolled exercise of any power, even when it's intended to operate for the good of mankind, may frequently end in the subversion of legal establishments. This fatal revolution, by whatever means it is accomplished, terminates in military government. And this, though the simplest of all governments, is rendered complete by degrees. When, by the conquest and annexation of every rich and cultivated province, the measure of empire is full, two parties are sufficient to comprehend mankind, that of the pacific and the wealthy who dwell within the pale of empire, and that of the poor, the rapacious, and the fierce, who are inured to depredation and war. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask not for applause for me, but I ask you to applaud the older and wiser Ferguson. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to both Ferguson Sr. and Ferguson Jr. Neil, we have a custom in the Madison program to begin by recognizing any students who have questions. Now,
Before we do the questions, let me just do a quick plug here to help support the channel. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Goodnight formula. This will help with getting those 2 to 3 cycles of REM sleep that you need for proper rest and proper detoxification. People don't realize that REM is really important for consolidating memories, but not just that, to help to get you a well-rested sleep and to help to detoxify cells and the central nervous system through the cerebral spinal fluid. So if you aren't going into REM sleep, you're not going to be detoxifying your body, and you're going to accumulate toxins and debris in these cells. When that accumulates over decades, what will happen is that you will have poor metabolism in those cells, poor function of those tissues. And there is research out there that suggests that early dementia could happen. So please make sure that you get well-rested sleep. If you are having a problem with that, please go to my store and get the Goodnight formula. Take it every day, and you'll get that well-rested sleep. It has tryptophan and melatonin in it. The ideal way is to get sleep where you are not taking the Goodnight formula. But if you are having a problem because of anxiety or you're just have interrupted sleep for whatever reason, maybe change in work schedules or whatever, please keep in mind that you need those 2 to 3 REM cycles to properly detoxify your body, get the restfulness that you would normally get in a sleep, and consolidate memory. So again, go to the store and get the Goodnight formula and take it every night, so you can get the 3 cycles of REM sleep. So let's begin with the questions.
I know that there are some students, quite a few actually here, who are in my civil liberties course. And this morning in civil liberties, The subject was how the American founders proposed to make a republic succeed despite the historical fact of the failure of all previous republics, and in fact, the collapse of previous republics into the worst forms of despotism. Now, the younger Mr. Ferguson doesn't have much faith in that project being successful. We need to ask ourselves whether infidelity to our own Constitution might be the cause of our demise, but we also have to ask ourselves whether fidelity to our Constitution might still fulfill the ambition of the framers to create a republic that endures. But with that, let me ask if any of our students would like to lead us off with questions. We have one up here. Mrs. Parker will hand you the microphone. Thank you, sir.
I wanted to bring you back. You mentioned that one of the reasons you thought American democracy might be failing was the increased level of illegal immigrants. I wonder what importance you would put on keeping American democracy isolated to natural-born Americans. Is it that natural Americans should have more of a say in the government simply because they're from our country or were born in our country? Do you really see that there's an inherent problem with keeping democracy upright if we keep on having illegal immigrants?
Well, I'm a legal immigrant, as is my wife. And my experience is that we who've gone through this quite protracted and not inexpensive process feel a little dismayed when others appear able to harvest the benefits of citizenship by getting across the border. The United States needs immigrants, but it's getting the wrong immigrants by this method. One of the oddest features of the last decade is that legal immigration has got steadily harder. Visas are harder to obtain for skilled immigrants who would clearly contribute almost immediately to national income. And control of the border, control of illegal immigration has almost broken down. This is a very hard thing to explain, and future historians will puzzle over why this happened. All over the world, people want to come here. And indeed, the secret of American success has been the attraction of talent to these shores and its rapid integration, not only into the workforce, but into the population of citizens. But when Canada's or Australia's or even Britain's immigration policy is superior to America's, the consequences are, I think, quite predictable. So the most obvious thing that the United States needs to do is urgently to reform its system of legal immigration, make it easier, give people who currently take the desperate route across the southern border the opportunity to take a more rational and safer route to a green card and citizenship. But to have a system that currently favors the illegal over the legal is truly bizarre and at odds with policy in almost every other country in the Anglosphere. Let me say one more thing. Half of just about all the unicorn billion-dollar plus companies founded in this country since the mid-1990s were founded by immigrants. And if you include the children of immigrants, it's practically all of them. This is something that no geopolitical rival of the United States can match. China certainly can't. The United States is in an astonishingly blessed position of being a magnet for talent. When you poll people around the world and you ask them, would you like to emigrate? And they say, yes, where would you like to go to? The United States is still their preferred destination. So for the United States to squander this opportunity in the way that it currently does, which is a bipartisan failure, is a deeply baffling thing.
Other questions from students? Yes, over here. Yeah, yes, sir. Mrs. Parker will bring you the mic.
Thank you for coming. I feel really lucky to hear you talk today. I listened to your podcast with Tim Ferriss about a year ago, and you being a fan. I thought a figure that was striking was the increase in government spending towards interest payments over military spending. And I'd like to hear what you think is to be done about that. And you can draw from lessons in history.
Thank you. I'm glad you came across me on a podcast. I sometimes think that podcasts will soon outnumber people, and I don't know how anybody has time to absorb all these podcasts, but it obviously serves some purpose. Long ago, I think 20 plus years ago, I wrote a book called The Cash Nexus, which is my least readable book. It's really quite dull and full of tables and charts, and it was at my nerdiest. And the book offers the proposition that any great power or empire that spends more on debt service than on defense is in deep trouble, based on the experience of past empires. The empires that crossed this line in the 19th century all ended badly. The Ottoman Empire began to fall apart in the 1870s because it had crossed the threshold that debt service exceeded defense spending. And this then became the fate of other empires, including ultimately the British Empire, which simply could not sustain both its enormous post-World War II debt and the costs of policing its empire. And that's one of the main drivers of decolonization. So I've long had the hypothesis it's not a law. It's not Ferguson's law. There are no laws in history except the law of unintended consequences. But there is a hypothesis that when a country exceeds this threshold and is spending more on debt service than on defense, it is in trouble. And the United States has just done that. Now, it's done it before, briefly, when interest rates were really high, back in the post-Paul Volcker disinflation. So it's not unprecedented, as the chart showed. But that was a brief moment. Here, because the debt burden has so grown and because interest rates are unlikely to revert to their very low levels of the post-global financial crisis pre-pandemic period, it's hard for me to see how this can easily be brought under control. There is, if you look at the Congressional Budget Office projections, there is no scenario, not a single scenario of all the ones the CBO considers, in which the debt burden declines over the next several decades. And there are scenarios, several, in which it explodes up towards the Japanese level.
This is extremely important, what he's saying, and people really need to pay attention. So back in the 70s, even beginning of the, maybe near the end of the 60s, we were starting to see problems, inflationary problems. But the war in Vietnam was costly. And then there was this inflation spike. So Volcker, comes in the early 80s, I think it was 81, and does shock therapy, with the interest rates. The Federal Reserve rate, skyrockets, and then interest rates start to come down slowly. And during the Reagan and Bush Senior years, interest rates kept on going down and stabilizing. We're talking about the stabilization of these interest rates now are done during the Greenspan years. Now, eventually, what happens is that we start to build up risk in the property sector. Derivatives are started to be produced and sold as risk instruments to move risk off the balance sheet. And eventually we have Lehman in 2007, 2008. It really kind of starts, though. You see the cracks of Lehman and the property prices, especially the residential, in about 2006 in the Midwest, when car sales were starting to go down a little bit. So, and there was a little bit, if I remember right, in 2006, there was a little bit of a surge in gasoline prices. So So that's kind of a long arc of the dynamic. What's different between the Volcker years of '81 was we didn't have a president at the time that was really pushing for social programs. You know, Reagan was about deregulation and getting rid of the welfare state, and making the economy more productive and more kind of capitalistic, right? What is different now is just that we had a much more expensive war in the Middle East that lasted for 20 years compared to the Vietnam era. And we have an older population that is needing care. Healthcare costs are much higher, and Social Security expenses are much higher. So social programs, the social program burden is much greater now than it was back in, let's say, late 70s, early 80s. So that dynamic is different. On top of, you're hearing, certain groups like the BLM movement, pushing for other social programs and reparations. And these sorts of things will be inflationary. So I'm not surprised that the debt service to defense spending ratios that Niall Ferguson is presenting in this lecture this problem will be longer lasting than what we saw in '81 with Volcker. And that is really, really dangerous. That's where we're probably seeing literally the cracks of our constitutional republic in real time because of all these events that will culminate into a change system. There's a chaotic thing that's starting to emerge because of this defense spending versus debt service ratio. If we don't get the economy more productive and bring down inflation and bring down the cost of government, we will lose this constitutional republic.
So I think the fiscal situation has become unsustainable. For a country to run a 7% of GDP deficit at full employment, the economists in this room will know, is indefensible. The level of fiscal recklessness that both parties have been responsible for, because it's not a partisan issue, is just outrageous. And it immediately begins to impact the country's capacity to fight a war. If you look at the war games that have been done recently for the scenario of a US-China war over Taiwan, and there was a good one done by CSIS recently, the United States runs out of precision missiles within a week. We are far less prepared for such a conflict than we would like to believe popularly, because there has been such an erosion of our military industrial base. And that is a concern to me. I left it out of this discussion because I wanted to focus on the question of liberal democracy. But it's not just Russia that poses a threat to liberal democracy today. It's an axis of ill will that includes China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And nothing is more concerning to me than the fact that these four powers are now acting in concert to undermine American primacy. And we do not have a good strategy for coping with this quartet. Because if we are faced with crises in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the Far East simultaneously, I believe the extent of our imperial overstretch will be laid bare. Thanks for the question.
More student questions. Yes, over here. Yes, Steve.
Thank you again. Something that I think the previous question got at is that a lot of the issues that we're currently dealing with are consequences of political leaders who lack the courage to make decisions that maybe are not going to be too popular, but are necessary for long-term survival. And this kind of ties to the point you raised in the bigger quote from Niall and Ferguson. Do you have any kind of prescriptions for resolving that going forward, for creating the kind of incentives that lead to political leaders taking these steps that are necessary for this survival?
Thanks for that question. Professors are the last people to ask about leadership, because we have selected out of leadership, unless you believe there's such a thing as thought leadership, a phrase that I despise. As I think Professor George mentioned, I'm in the midst of the biography of Henry Kissinger, not uncontroversial figure. Kissinger wrote until the end of his life. He finished a book on leadership shortly before his 100th birthday, and it's a book worth reading. I expected it not to be good, I'll be honest. And I found I'd underestimated him. The book is a very powerful meditation on what distinguished the great leaders he knew in his time in government from today's leaders. Part of it is simply that they had experienced World War II. And I think the experience of that war was formative to a generation of leaders in ways that it would be very hard to synthesize. The baby boomers were defined partly by their skill at avoiding war, were they not? What is it that Bill Clinton had in common with George W. Bush and with Donald J. Trump? Their skill at avoiding being deployed to fight in the Vietnam War. So the absence of war is, I think, part of the answer. And this may be rectified because there is a new generation of American politicians on both sides of the aisle who served their country in war. However one thinks of the global war on terror, and you may take the view that it was all a terrible mistake, for the individuals who served their country in Iraq and Afghanistan, real sacrifices were made and in some cases, great courage shown. So I have a sense that the next generation of American leaders will not have some of the deficiencies of the baby boomers with whom we are still, alas, saddled. Not that young politicians are always the answer. In Britain, the politicians are all young enough to be my children, and it's just as bad. It may even be worse than having geriatrics. There's a second point, though, which is a more profound one that I learned from Kissinger. In an early essay, before he got into government, he formulated a problem of conjecture, which I think is one of his best ideas. And the problem of conjecture states that any statesman, any political leader, at the point of decision, has a choice. If he or she foresees some calamity, with some probability above 5%, some high probability calamity, they can take action now at some cost, or they can do nothing at no cost. If they take action and prevent the catastrophe, there'll be no gratitude, because no one is grateful for something that was avoided. Nobody says, thank God we avoided World War III. What a splendid fellow Henry Kissinger was. You won't hear that, least of all amongst undergraduates. Though it is in fact a legitimate claim one could make. On the other hand, if you do nothing, Kissinger says, you may be lucky. The disaster may not occur. And when it does occur, you can say fatalistically, there was nothing I could do to avoid it. And this problem of conjecture is particularly serious for democracies, where the incentives are extraordinarily asymmetrical. Why would you make a sacrifice now to deal with the problem of public debt that might strike 20 years down the road? That's why this hasn't been addressed. And the same problem arises with the vexed question of climate change. Ultimately, all calls for action about climate change to reduce rising average temperatures involve some short-run immediate sacrifice, even if it's only in the form of more expensive energy for consumers. And this too is extremely hard to do within a democratic system. So I think there is not only a kind of problem of experience, I think there is a structural problem that makes it hard to lead if you're leading people in the direction of an immediate sacrifice, because if you succeed, there'll be no gratitude. And this is the statesman's tragedy that Kissinger understood long before he went into government.
Neil, you'll be pleased that yesterday I struck the word thought leadership from the charter of the new Salmon P. Chase Center for Civic Affairs at Ohio State University. I'm chairing the committee to create that, and thought leadership appeared in the draft they presented me, but it is now gone.
Good, good. Strike it down.
More student questions.
Strike it down.
Any other students? If not, we will open. Oh, we have one more up here. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. I was very interested by the relationship between zeal and democracies. And it seemed like at the beginning of the talk, we were talking about zeal as a fundamental element to sustain the rule of law and liberal democracies. I like the idea, but well, I'm Italian, so I was brought up in a completely different political context than the US. And as soon as I got here, I realized that everyone has a lot of zeal, and it seems like this zeal leads to polarization away, which it doesn't in Europe. So it seems like zeal now is more the cause of the crisis of liberal democracies than, yeah, it seems to be the cause.
Yes.
So I wonder, this zeal that leads to irreconcilable positions makes me ask the question, do you think in a postmodern world, can liberal democracies exist?
What an excellent question. Adam Ferguson was a Highlander, and you can tell he's a more passionate figure than his lowland contemporaries. And if you've ever read Walter Scott's great novel Waverley, which I recommend to all of you, you will understand this difference. And that's why zeal is to Adam Ferguson a commendable thing. And why his central argument, which I think is right, is that unless you have that passion for democracy and the rule of law and the Constitution every day, unless you can sustain that passion, then you can't expect the institutions to endure. Now, Adam Ferguson was writing slightly before the advent of social media. The structure of the public sphere in the days of the Enlightenment was a very different structure from our own. Jürgen Habermas has written well about this. The Enlightenment thinkers published their works and corresponded with one another, would meet. Ferguson as Smith and Hume traveled. And this public sphere seems enormously attractive to me. I can't imagine a more extraordinary time to be a thinker than the Scotland of the late 18th century. To have been in Edinburgh in the time of Hume and Ferguson and Smith, it must have been an electrifying time. I don't say lightly that all the good ideas were had then, but they pretty much were. There was not much of a gutter press, as there was in France. Robert Darnton has written brilliantly about this. Though there was the beginnings of a gutter press in London. And Scotland had at this time much higher literacy than anywhere else in the world. The Scots had become literate partly through Calvinism and basic investment in education. So you had a remarkably literate populace that was exposed to ideas in a way that, again, seems idyllic. I think the structure of the public sphere has been completely altered by the internet in ways that we still don't fully comprehend, because we think it's essentially not that different. We have the delusion that newspapers still matter, We have the delusion that cable television matters. We think that movies matter. Actually, these are entirely anachronistic views. Young people pay almost no attention to these things. They get their news from TikTok, and they're more likely to play games than go to movies. The public sphere has radically changed. And the problem is, and I wrote a whole book about this called The Square and the Tower, available in all good bookstores. Support your local bookstore, don't buy it on Amazon. The platforms, the network platforms that arose to dominate the internet with amazing speed in a matter of a few years, totally changed the structure of the public sphere. And because of their particular model to monetize, namely the selling of ads, they created an engine for polarization that did not exist before. The discovery that people were more likely to stay on a particular screen if it was sensational was a critical discovery in the history of Google. It was the basis for Facebook's model. If you followed the recent hearings in Congress when Mark Zuckerberg faced very hostile questioning, the adverse consequences of this business model are far greater than he will ever admit. Because if he were to admit to the scale of the harm done especially to young people, the legal liabilities would bankrupt his currently very profitable company. So this is the difference. The structure of the public sphere is the reason zeal has become so toxic in the United States. And the failure of Congress to legislate by changing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is, I think, one of the great failures of modern regulation of the public sphere.
Floor is now generally open, so questions from anybody.
Age discrimination is over.
Yeah, age discrimination is over. So who would like to ask a question? Yeah, we have one up here. There you go.
You speak often about the rule of law. And a question for you is, what is your feeling about the speed and efficiency on the effectiveness of the rule of law?
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that the World Justice Project looks at. And it's very clear to me that the rule of law in the United States is both slow and expensive. And access is inferior. So the World Justice Project gives much higher ratings to the UK, or I should say to England, which is a somewhat different legal system from Scotland. It gives higher marks to England than to the United States, partly for that reason. So this is a key point. It's a reason we should be concerned. It should not only be the very wealthy who can go to law, but currently it is.
Next question. Yes, down here. Could I have a microphone? Yeah, down here, Denny. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm giving shorter answers now because I'm conscious that we're running out of time.
Yeah, I think England is solving its problem of illegal immigrants by sending them to Zimbabwe. Do you think we should follow suit?
It's Rwanda. It's actually Rwanda, not Zimbabwe. The people judged to have illegal asylum applicants are supposed to be sent, but nobody has yet been sent because of legal challenges to the policy. And I never thought it was a good idea to do that. I'll be amazed if it ever happens. Rishi Sunak bet Piers Morgan £1,000 yesterday that he would get it done. He's going to lose that bet, I would predict. And I don't think it's the answer. I mean, the only plausible answer must be a better defensible border. You can't have the most attractive economy in the world with an open border. That's just not sustainable. And this requires investment. Borders are good. They're necessary. You can't have a stable political order if you have an indefensible frontier. No European would expect you to have an indefensible frontier.
Denmark is setting up detention camps. That is a solution.
Well, if people get into your country illegally, what would you do with them? You can't simply hand them a passport and say, welcome aboard. That's not a rational strategy. So there have to be borders. They have to be defensible. Otherwise, the system of citizenship itself is eroded in ways that are fatal.
It's a very patient gentleman up there who's had his hand up.
About half a dozen different questions.
Pick one from the basket.
If a leader, presidential candidates or otherwise, stood up and made a compelling theory of the case about what we need to do as a nation, would Americans sign on board? Are we such a polished society now that everybody's like, it's going to cost me something? I'm not sure. And I'm thinking like Jimmy Carter said during the, I'm an old white guy, so I remember these things. Jimmy Carter said, let's do what we can to become an efficient society and end our dependence on foreign oil. And they gave him good consequences.
Well, this is a good question, and as we're running out of time, I'll consider it maybe the penultimate question. I had a very heated argument with the Vice Chancellor of Oxford University about this. I said, it is far from unprecedented for politicians to appeal to voters with respect to the interests of posterity, of future generations. Her claim was that the climate issue had created an entirely unprecedented situation in which politicians were asking contemporaries to make sacrifices for future generations. No, my grandfathers sacrificed for future generations. My father's father fought on the Western Front against the Germans for most of the 1914-18 war. My mother's father fought the Japanese in Burma. They ran considerable risks and both suffered significant health damage that shortened their lives. They weren't doing it for gratification. They were doing it for me. And the leaders, Britain's leaders at that time, explicitly appealed to young men to fight for their country, for the freedom of future generations. Read Churchill's speeches, the greatest speeches of the 20th century, in which he repeatedly appeals to the interests of future generations. My grandfathers understood that. The medal he received had on it the Great War for Civilization. That was how he understood those hellish years in the trenches. So I think we are kidding ourselves if we think it's no longer possible to address today's voters on behalf of their grandchildren. Politicians stopped using that language a while ago. But I believe if they start using it again, we'll respond. If one said, and let me say one more thing. If we said, if we continue down this present path, quite apart from the risks of creating an unsustainable climate, we run a short-run risk of defeat at the hands of authoritarian powers led by the Chinese Communist Party. Do we want our children to live in a world in which the dominant institution is the CCP? Do we want them to ask the question that my Chinese students at Tsinghua had to ask? Did I say or write anything yesterday that could get me in trouble today? Is that the world we want our grandchildren to live in? I don't have grandchildren yet, but I certainly don't want them to live in that world. And so
I have been saying this for 4 years, and why it is so important to make sure that we navigate through our debt crisis and our social spending and our political division carefully as we approach conflict in Asia. I've mentioned it on many different videos, but in essence, the United States, if we lose a conflict in the Pacific with China, the world will view that as a model to try to mimic. And the world will be run by a one-party system that is very similar, or maybe even a copy paste of the Chinese government. Now, if we win the conflict, unfortunately, at the current juncture, the debt would be astronomical to be able to win the war, that it would be the straw that breaks the camel's back as a rising empire for the United States. So even with winning, we lose. But if we lose the war with the Chinese, we will lose our Constitution, and we'll lose the freedoms that many that hold dear. So it's a lose-lose situation. It's a question of how much do you lose. That's how I see it.
These arguments can be made and should be made, and I look to a new generation of leaders to make those arguments. And I believe when they do, we'll respond to them.
With that, what that presupposes is that we will marry and have children to have grandchildren, and the decline of the marriage rate and the demographic collapse raises a very interesting question about the politics of what will be appealing. What appeals to you if you have the prospect of grandchildren? What appeals to you if you don't?
Well, I'll certainly be encouraging you all to have children, students, and grandchildren, if that's something you can bring about. I have 5 children. I'm shooting for a pretty decent grandchild target. I can assure you, and I address this to the students in the room, if your generation is full of doubts about whether to have children or not, perhaps not in the Madison program, but there is nothing more important that you will do, nothing more important than to have children, to bring them up, to educate them, to tell them the meaning of individual freedom, the value of constitutional government, to persuade them that it is vitally important that constitutional government and freedom survive in this country, because it still is the great beacon of hope for the world. If you don't have children and you don't drill that into them, then you will have failed in life. So you must do that.
Yeah, it's not about Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to Dr. Ferguson. We will reassemble. We get a second shot at him tomorrow, 4th.
So I'll do a part 3 for the first half of that one, and a part 4 for the conclusion of that lecture. But hopefully you learned something from at least the first 2 parts that I've done. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great products that I have. I have a probiotic, which is really important for you to improve your gut health. Take it every day. It's a powder. You mix it with your food, or you can mix it with water. Take it every day. I usually take it during my lunch. And what will happen is it'll get your gut with the proper probiotics, right? And you'll start to absorb your nutrients better. You'll have better aligning of the gut. The health of the lining of the gut will improve. You'll have more consistent stools. And in addition, there's a communication between your gut and your liver and your gut and your brain. And that communication will improve, and your metabolism will get better, and you'll have more energy. So many problems that people have, chronic problems, start with the gut. Not all, but many problems. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the excellent probiotic that I have. It's in powder. Take it every day, and it's part of the anti-aging protocol to improve your health and your immune system. So thank you for listening. Make sure you share the links. Subscribe to my 6 channels. All the links are in the description. Go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And if you can help to support my work by donation, I greatly appreciate it. The links are on the homepage. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee, and the buy me the coffee link is also in the description of this video. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.